Hey there, it's Kelly Sienkowski, and today we're shining the spotlight on data centers and the water that they consume. Joining me today is I think I get the title right, a senior water resources specialist for the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, Alimatou Seck. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Kelly.
I appreciate you taking the time to chat. So, can you tell me a little bit about you? What is a senior water resources specialist?
My title is Senior Water Resources Scientist. I work at the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River, which is an interstate compact that was created in 1940s and bring together Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, the District of Columbia, and the federal government. So it was created by an act of Congress. And our mission is to enhance and protect the Potomac River and the associated land of the Potomac River Basin. Um, and within that, my role is to focus on hydrological modeling and forecasting to help anticipate low flow conditions in the Potomac River. I work within the co-op section, which is the water cooperative water resources. Section for cooperative water management for the Potomac River. And so we focus on managing water resources in the Potomac River, specifically water supply, and monitoring drought and managing the water supply from the river, basically when conditions are low.
Yeah. And I want to touch on, could you mention drought? If I understand correctly, Virginia has been in a drought for the last couple of years, give or take.
Um, yes, conditions in Virginia vary widely depending on where you are in the state. So there are areas where we have normal kind of conditions currently, and then there are areas specifically within the Potomac Basin that are in a drought warning. And yes, the past few years, I would say from 2023 onward, we've had these episodes of dry conditions in Virginia and in the Potomac River. In particular, currently we are in drought monitoring, which is a phase in our drought procedures where we monitor river flow, water demand, when the river at Point of Rocks, which is a gauging station location, when the river is below a certain threshold, which is 2,000 cubic feet per second, we start monitoring drought conditions. So we've been doing that for a while now, for a few
Hmm.
months, off and on. And in general, just, we've experienced a deficit in precipitation overall in the region. Groundwater levels are so low. Yeah.
And let's talk about that because I think that's an important connection to make. If we don't have much precipitation or an unusually low amount of precipitation over the course of a season or a year, that's what feeds directly into our groundwater supply, correct?
Yes. So precipitation is an important variable in the hydrological cycle because this is what recharge the groundwater. It also what feeds in the rivers and the streams, both just the natural flows and also the recharge from the groundwater, which is very important when there's dry condition because that's where the base flow is coming from. So when we have a precipitation deficit that last for a long time, then we start having those impacts with low river flows and low groundwater levels.
Hmm. So when you guys are monitoring the water, you mentioned that you're watching the speed of the flow. Are there any other factors that you guys are tracking beyond just how fast the water is flowing?
We measure the volumetric rate of the flow, so how much water is going through a particular location, uh, you know, uh, um,
So how much and
per time. Say that again.
how fast is what we're looking at.
Um, yes, how much water is going for a specific amount of time, which has to do with the velocity, but also the area of that river section. So basically, what volume of water is going through a particular section of the river for a particular period of time. So that tells you basically how much water you have. And so you can compare that uh, with the longer record period and tells you, are you higher than normal or are you lower than normal, right? In addition to that, we also monitor, like, as we talked about precipitation, how much precipitation we've had recently, but also over the past year, what is the precipitation deficit? Currently, we are at a 7 inches below normal deficit. So meaning that compared to normal conditions, we have 7 inches less than we would normally in a normal year. So that is something also that we track. We track the water demands, basically how much water are, is being needed by population, businesses, commercial, industrial, agricultural users. So these are the things that we track currently on a daily basis. More broadly, every year, starting from April through October, we develop what we call water supply outlooks. These are basically forecasting model that we develop to evaluate the likelihood of needing to release water from upstream reservoirs. And then, this is more in terms of long-term planning. Every 5 years, we do a study, which goal is to evaluate if current water resources and future water resources are going to be sufficient to adequately supply demand in the future. So the most recent of those studies that we did was in 2025. So we published that in December. So that's the report you were mentioning earlier. And so the goal was to evaluate through the horizon year 2050 if planned and current and planned resources are going to be enough to meet the expected demand by the year 2050.
So you said that was finished in December 2025. So that study will probably include quite a significant amount of consideration for the data center industry. I mean, I think a lot of people are hearing about it. Data centers in Virginia are booming, and they're concentrated north, but they are sort of slowly trickling down south, and they're spreading around. So how do we consider data centers in terms of their water consumption? Do you guys have sort of an average of what you expect a data center to consume?
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. With the proliferation of data centers in Virginia, but not only in Virginia, we've started seeing new developments in Maryland as well. So with just this rapid expansion, we thought that we should certainly include the evaluation of data centers' water demand in the 2025 demand study. We were very fortunate to have a working relationship with the utilities that supply water to resident businesses, industries in the Washington metropolitan area, and that also supply water to data centers. So these are the customers, these data centers are customers of these water utilities. And so that's where we started. And this is what we normally do. We would go to the utilities and obtain withdrawal data that they get from the river, as well as billing data, aggregate of billing data for the customers. And so that's where we started. And we were able from that to evaluate by just adding up, the water used by data centers in different service areas of the Washington metropolitan area,
Hmm.
adding that up to determine how much in total they are using currently. And then looking into the future, evaluating how much they are going to use, we rely on projections that are currently being done by PJM, which is the Power Grid Administrator. They have projection on what energy consumption they expect from from these data centers, or for the grid in general. And so from that, we were able to estimate how much energy our data centers are going to use.
Sure.
And then, there is a relationship between the power consumption of a data center and the amount of water they use, right?
Yeah.
And so using those variable, we were able to estimate basically current data center water use and what we expect it to look like in the future.
Okay, so it sounds like the amount of power usage is really what drives the amount of water that they need. If I understand correctly, the data
Absolutely.
center, it's really about cooling down the equipment. That's what
Right.
everybody keeps saying. We're cooling down the building, we're cooling down the servers, and whatever magical things are inside of a data center.
Yes. So the majority of the water footprint from data centers come from cooling the servers,
Hmm.
right? So a server is, similar to, your laptop or your computer. So when it runs processes, it heats up. And so those components inside the server needs to be cooled down. And so water is one way of cooling down servers. There are many methods out there that data centers, that are used to cool data centers, but water cooling is one of the most effective methods and also cheaper methods for cooling data centers. Um, and so, depending on the size of the data center, depending on its power demand, depending on the climate, where you are, the humidity, the temperature, outside temperature, all of those factors play a part in how much water they use.
And when we consider the demand that they are withdrawing from our water supply, I- there's been conversations about recycling water and things like that. Did that put much of a damper in your projection for how much water they'll still use if they say they're recycling it?
Yes. So, yes, that does play a part in some of the area within the Potomac Basin and Loudoun County in particular. About half of the water that is being used by data center is from recycled water,
Right.
basically. And that is an important consideration, and that's a good thing because basically, that's less demand on potable water. But however, when you're looking at things regionally, recycling doesn't necessarily solve all issues, right? Because a lot of times that recycled water is being basically evaporated. If
Mhm.
it's in the case, for example, of a evaporative cooling data center, uh, you either withdraw water from the river or use recycled water. But in both cases, you are taking water from the river and then evaporating it. So it's out of the regional
Right.
system, right? So it's lost, or at least some of it is lost. A good amount of it is lost.
Hmm.
Some studies suggest that for evaporative cooling, 75 or 90 to 90% of the water that is withdrawn is lost to evaporation. So that is a significant number, and that is water that otherwise would have reached the river and then being able to use downstream. And that is not the case for either recycled or just
Hmm.
using withdrawn. So, so yeah, in a nutshell, it is a positive thing to use recycled water because it's less demand on potable water, but it still have an effect on the regional system, depending on where that recycled water is coming from.
So that's another thing too, because we're talking about the additional demand from data centers drawing water from the rivers and the water system. When we have, let's call it the drought that we're monitoring, drought warning, when you're talking about having a lower level of precipitation in the first place and then increasing the amount of demand, how do we envision the health of our water system when we've got those two forces combining? Less precipitation to replenish the water supply and increase demand on that same water supply.
Yeah, that's not an ideal combination.
I would
So
imagine.
right. So I mean, if we're looking forward, looking into, for example, projected climate or meteorological changes in the Potomac Basin, um, studies actually show that we expect an increase in precipitation in the region as a result of global change, but we also expect an increase in temperature. And those two things have a competing effect on the stream flow. Increase in precipitation tend to increase stream flow, whereas increase in temperature would tend to reduce stream flow because of higher evapotranspiration, right? And so, that is something that we really have to pay attention to the current trends in those meteorological changes, but also, like you say, the emerging demands, whether from data centers or from population growth or from the decrease in conservation measures. And when it comes to data centers, currently we find that their footprint is relatively modest at about 4 to 5 million gallons per day in the Washington metro area. But when we start looking into the variability of that demand, then we start to see that there are peak demands, particularly in summer, which is a time where you have lower river flows. Those peak demands can be really high, sometimes 3 to 4 times higher than the average demand. And so looking into the future, by 2050, we estimate that using a medium scenario, not even the highest scenario, medium scenario,
Right.
we estimate 80 million gallons per day peak demand by data centers in the region, which is really substantial considering that the overall demand is about 600 million gallons per day,
Mhm.
and that the minimum flow, the environmental flow by, which is the minimum flow required to sustain downstream ecosystem and river health, is 100 cubic feet per second, or 150 million gallons per day. So 80 million gallons per day is quite significant. And so that is really, I think, one of the consideration that we really need to pay attention to, not just the average demand, but those peak demands, which can be really high during the summer.
Hmm. And I want to touch back on what you said, a medium scenario. When you're saying you're considering a medium scenario, do you mean in terms of the number of data centers that could be approved? You're not even saying every single application being approved right now would be a very high scenario because there are a lot
Right.
of applications
Yes. Good. Yeah.
involved.
So there are, a lot of uncertainty, with the artificial intelligence boom, right?
Sure.
Um, and that is going to drive how much data centers we ended up having in the future. We don't know where they are going to be located necessarily. And then in addition to that, there is the question of what cooling technologies they are going to use, right? Currently in the Washington metropolitan area, the mix is about 60% evaporative cooling, which is the type of cooling that tends to use a lot of water and consume a lot of water, and for air cooling, right, which tends to use no water at all. And so looking into the future, it is not clear what that mix is going to look like. Are data centers going to be using more water in the future, or are they going to lean toward air cooling or even innovative methods such as immersive cooling or capture or vapor capture methods that are being currently looked at, which if there are innovations, it could be that they may end up using no water at all. So we had to,
Mm-hmm.
include that uncertainty. And the way that we did that is by using scenarios. A high data center demand scenario, which is based on cooling technology, a medium demand, which is similar to what we see currently, and a lower demand. And then with that, there's also, power demand scenarios, which is based on, as you mentioned earlier, is there going to be a lot of data centers now, or is it just going to be, are we going to see basically, these numbers that we are expecting currently, or is the demand going to, decrease for, any reason that we may imagine? Yeah, so and that matters because we can determine what we are using currently, but the medium scenario is something that we like to code because it's the scenario that is most similar to what we have today. And so that's those 80 million gallons per day. That is the most similar to what we have today. And so, we can see, okay, if things change and we have much more data centers, then we expect that 80 million gallons per day is definitely not going to be, the number that we expect. But currently, based on what we see, this is where we are.
That makes sense. And I want to share a picture of the basin. Let me see if I can get this to pop up here. This is from the ICPRB's website. Can you tell me if the location of a data center, for example, we know there's a whole cluster of them essentially in Loudoun County. Is the location of the data centers and where they withdraw the water from in terms of being higher up, like let's say toward Maryland or Pennsylvania, versus if they're pulling water from, say, somewhere down in Virginia Beach or in a lower area?
Whether it matters?
Yeah. Like, does it affect the, I don't know, water flow in a different way? For example, if we get closer
Absolutely.
down toward
Yes.
lower into the Chesapeake Bay, if you were pulling water from there, would that have a more significant effect than, say, if you were pulling it from up by Baltimore?
Yes. So the location of data centers development is very important. And this is why in the study we distinguish between two areas, especially when we're talking about water supply reliability for the Washington metro area. So we distinguish between upstream areas. These are areas basically upstream of where the water utilities withdrawal are located. So anything upstream to that, that's the upstream data center water use, and then we evaluate it downstream. And upstream is when when you're thinking about the regional system, is something that we really worry about a lot because any water that is basically evaporated and removed from the system upstream is water that is not going to reach downstream utilities, and so that's water that is lost from the system. So yes, the location of these data centers is something that is very critical in how you evaluate their impact on the regional water supply system. Ideally, they would be, all the way downstream after all users have, withdrawn their water demands. But, they're citing, there are many considerations that they, think about, that data centers developers think about when deciding where to site. And so, they tend to stay, within the same area because of latency issues. Where fresh water is located is also important to them. So they tend to be in the same in the same area, and that does definitely have an impact on um, you know what the resulting effect is going to be in the hydrological cycle of that area.
Right. But then I thank you for that explanation. 'Cause what you were saying about upstream versus downstream, you're right. There's a lot of people using that water all the way down through the bottom of the watershed. And if you're focusing on the top area and that's where you're withdrawing all of your water, that's not going to make it down to the bottom. So
Absolutely.
that was a great explanation of that. Thank you. So let's go ahead and say, I mean, with all these data centers putting in applications and sort of spreading across the state, across the Potomac River Basin area, what do you think that communities or maybe even like the state government, what kind of safeguarding should we be looking for to kind of protect the water system? And we're not saying zero data centers. That's probably not realistic at all. But how do we safeguard the water while balancing this need for data centers?
Yeah. So with us at ICPRB, we are not for or against data centers, but we are
Right,
interested in
absolutely.
understanding what emerging demands look like, because that has an implication on water supply for Washington metropolitan area residents. It has
Mhm.
an impact also on the environmental flow of the river, right? So, um, in that regard, transparency is something that, we are we would really push for, because if we don't know how much individual data centers are withdrawing and how that relate to their power usage, how does it relate to the type of cooling technology they are using, then we are not well equipped to develop forecasts in the future. So one thing I think that would be really helpful for the scientific community in general, but for ICPRB and all of our partners that are working on this issue, is to have
Mhm.
greater transparency in the water usage of data centers at the site level, um, and not just aggregates, but understand how those withdrawals change day by day. How do they change between the winter and the summer? What are those seasonal variations? So transparency is one thing. The second thing is that there are currently environmental regulation. There are currently consumptive water use regulation that applies to a lot of industries new industry that would be in the basin. In the case of the data centers, however, they tend to withdraw from, or tend to be supplied by water utilities. And so a lot of those consumptive use regulation do not directly apply to them because they are not direct withdrawers of water. And I think this is something that policymakers and decision makers need to really look into and see how applicable those state consumptive use regulation would be to data centers, because normally they would be applicable to new industry that would withdraw from
Mhm.
the river, but because they don't necessarily withdraw from the river and get water from from the water suppliers, it is difficult to evaluate the cumulative impacts of those data centers. And so, to what extent those regulations apply to them is something that is not clear.
So I think I understood what you said. I want to make sure I kind of trace it in my mind. So for example, a data center builds in Stafford County. Stafford County Utilities builds the water line and connects them for their water supply. They're not putting a pipe into the Rappahannock River and sucking it up that way.
Right.
And then,
Most of that, yes, that has been the case. Although I'll say that there are currently new permits that are in, that are in planning phase to, for those data centers to withdraw water directly. But the overwhelming majority of data centers do get their water from suppliers.
and when you talk about transparency there, so for example, they come to Stafford County, is anybody connecting the dots and saying, let's see what Stafford County is spending for water for data centers and Loudoun County and Prince William and, Hampton Roads? That's what I have not been able to see is something where it's a cumulative accounting of how many millions of gallons have actually been used because it's each county is doing its own thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly my point, and you put it well there. So what we are really concerned about is cumulative impacts because when we're talking about water, we tend to evaluate things at the basin scale, right? The
Mhm.
river basin scale. So the river basin is basically uh, all the lands surrounding a river that drain to that particular, to a particular point of that river. And so if we are trying to understand how much water we have for that particular system, we need to look at things cumulatively, right? So we need to understand, we can't really look at things at a county level. We have to, look at the entire system, the entire river basin system. And this is, what we try to do with this water demand study. And in the future, yes, having transparency in basically just not just because we have those aggregates, water utilities are able to tell us this is how much data centers use, and we have strong confidence in these numbers. But I think what is really needed is to understand the variation of that water use and
Hmm.
how that relate to their size, how that relate to their power demand, how that relates to the type of cooling technologies that they
Right.
use.
And like you said, also, I mean, data centers, they're constantly evolving. So there's definitely a chance that they will make innovations that change the water consumption drastically. But again, we need to know about it. Transparency. Well, Almadu, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Again, I'm Kelly Sienkowski. This is In the Spotlight, where today we focused on the water consumption that data centers are using. And with me today was Alimatou Seck, who is a senior water resources scientist for the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having me.